The days are longer, the calendar is filling up, and I want to feel as good as this beautiful summer weather. That's why I've been loving Groons. It's one daily pack of gummies that covers my greens, vitamins, and minerals, and even has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber. So I don't need to juggle a complicated wellness routine on top of everything else. They taste amazing. They're easy to toss in my bag on the go. Plus, they're vegan, gluten-free, and HSA, FSA eligible for reimbursement. Save up to 52% off with promo code podcast at gruns.co. That's code podcast at gruns.co.
The Dialed In Angling Podcast, presented by OnX Fish, Arneson's Rocky Point Resort, Strike Master, and 13 Fishing. Hey, welcome back to this week's podcast. We are fresh off what I would call a bucket list fishing trip. Really, it's something that I've wanted to do for a really long time. It's a trip that, I know friends have been telling me about. I've wanted to go in the fall. I've wanted to go in the spring. It just never has worked into our schedules. And that's the trip up to Lake Winnipeg. I've done a ton of ice fishing on Lake Winnipeg, but I have never open water fished on Lake Winnipeg. And I tell you what, I will be going back as quickly as possible. It is all that it is cracked up to be. It is all that you'd think it would be in open water. I mean, you think about smashing big greenbacks on ice, you times that times 100 on open water. That not only just the sheer amount of fish, but the average size fish. So the trip sort of went as followed for this. For years, my buddy Phil has been trying to talk me into going up there. My buddy Jake, there's a bunch of my friends have been like, I can't believe you have not fished Lake Winnipeg on open water. I mean, even dating back to Pine Falls tournament. They used to have this big Pine Falls tournament, and every year, I sort of threatened I wanted to fish it in October, and it just kind of never worked out. As we got towards October, it was like I had other things to do. I had hunting on my mind at that point. I had already fished all season. But then, if anybody knows anything about that Pine Falls tournament, I mean, they averaged, 8.5, 9 pound average pre-live scope and pre-forward facing sonar. And so, that was like eye-opening to me, right? How good the fishing was. And so I've just always wanted to get up there. Fast forward to last year when we were out in Ottertail, and Phil's like, okay, Robbie, you're going to graduate next year, graduation present. We're going up to Lake Winnipeg. Regardless if your dad's going or not, we're going. And as soon as they said that, I was like, I got to go. I've wanted to go for a long time. I just know the sheer numbers of fish they catch, but also the big ones. It greatly exceeded my expectations as far as the fishing and how we were fishing. And I'll get into all the details of this as we get to this podcast. We'll talk about the techniques we use, the locations we use, where we found fish in the water column, how shallow a fish we found, how we fished current areas, and how we fished areas that didn't have current. All of the above I want to cover on this podcast. But before I get into that, Robbie, I want to ask you firsthand, this is your first time to Lake Winnipeg as well. And it really is your first time to Canada for quite some time. What were your thoughts on the trip? First of all, going into it, and then now that, you've had an opportunity to sort of, digest what we did up there. I really wanted to do the podcast when we were up there, but every night we fished till 7:00 at night. We'd get up at 4 a.m. and hit the water by 6 a.m. So we decided to do the podcast when we get back home. Now that you've had a chance to kind of think about the trip, what are some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so right away, I just heard about how many fish you catch and how many big fish you catch. And going into it, I just had high hopes of catching big fish and see how it went. And when we were there, I didn't expect to catch so many big ones, like so many fish over 23 inches. And it's so consistent on how large the fish are. You're not catching a bunch of 13 or 14 inches and you get one over 20, it's like every single one is over 20. It's just absolutely mind-boggling.
It sort of mirrors that winter bite, where it's amazing when you go up to Lake Winnipeg, that South Basin, how many fish you catch in that I would consider quality range where it's like 23 and above. Very similar to that in the summer, only times 10. I mean, the fish are biting, they're aggressive. I think it's more like lake trout fishing than walleye fishing. It truly is. Like the fish are that aggressive where they strike like lake trout.
Yeah, it's crazy. A lot of times, if you just got the bait in front of their face, they would eat it off the bottom, swimming it in front of them, whatever, and they just crack that bait.
Yeah, we used all plastics. We used Crush City plastics the entire time. We never deviated from that. I did fish a hair jig a little bit, but I tipped it with a plastic. I had a jerk on the end of it. I had a Mayer paddle tail with a hair jig. I used a bucktail, a VMC bucktail. But for the most part, I just used a straight jig and a plastic. That first day, I did get a 31.5 on a hair jig with a paddle tail. But most of them I got on the jerk, and I think we got, I'd say about 50-50 between the Crush City jerk and the Crush City freeloader, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. For most of the day, I was using just the jerk, and I just used the same plastic and the same color all day, and they were just absolutely cracking it.
What's cool about the jerk is it's a like a fork tail minnow plastic. If you're unfamiliar, you gotta look it up. It's a walleye killer wherever you go. But the jerk is that TPE material, so just like a Ned rig or something like that, it's got that really durable plastic and it's buoyant. And so we were using those on moon eye jigs. Basically wore the paint off our moon eye jigs. We caught so many walleyes. But throwing the jerk out there, and there were certain spots where they wanted it on the bottom, where you'd rip it up off the bottom and they'd crack it, especially when we were in the current. When we were away from the current and those fish were up in the water column, they really wanted us swimming that bait, much like you'd swim a jig crawler, much like you'd float, like the bass anglers do. Every bass angler is used to throwing a minnow bait, a mooch minnow, something like that out there and floating that. We were doing that with the jerk. I did catch a few on mooch minnows too, but it didn't seem to matter. As long as you got that plastic in front of them, they were going to crack it. But they were really color specific. For as dirty as that water is, there were areas that were a little cleaner, but then also they had a really very dominant color preference when it came to plastics. A lot of times the jig heads didn't matter. We went from sort of that parrot color jig head to white to pinks were working. But that body style, what was amazing, certain areas, they really wanted white, right? That white color, anything white related, albino shad, sort of colors. But then there was other areas where they wanted smelt or gizzard shad, kind of that greenish blue sort of color. And it was very evident. Even electric shad worked really well for us. It was very evident in the areas where we'd get into, or we had, let's say we just left a spot that was a rocky shoreline, right? And we had scoped a bunch of fish, and we literally just scoped fish and kept on moving and just casting and pitching like you would be bass fishing. And we was picking off fish one after another. I mean, we were getting triples and quadruples once we got dialed in. And so by picking off those fish, we'd be in an area, let's say white was working really well. We as soon as we got done working that shoreline, we went to the next area, and all of a sudden we're like, man, they won't hit the white. They chase it. I switched over to a smelt color. Bang, 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 bang. It was like nonstop. So then we switched everybody over, caught them. Let's back up a little bit, Robbie, and talk about when we first got there and how, we didn't know where to go. We didn't know what we were doing, but we're fishermen. We have a live scope. We're pretty good at really getting, pardon my pun, but dialed into the bite, right? So we got up there, and I would say by the second spot we got to, we started catching them, right? We went up to that big main lake point. We didn't catch any there. There weren't a lot of fish there. We went to the next point. It was sort of a rocky point. And as we dropped the trolling motor down, you could see some fish suspended. There was fish on the bottom. We were in 14 to 16 feet, and we were rolling up to the point. I told Robbie, I said, I don't know what these are, but this lake is full of carp and sheephead and all this other stuff. I'm not sure what they are, but they're moving, but they're not flying. They almost look like walleyes. And I had thrown out there, and then instantly, wham, I cracked one. I threw out about 40 feet. I was using the hair jig at the time, a white hair jig, bucktail jig with a sort of chartreuse paddle tail. And I snapped it, and a fish just cracked it. I mean, it hit it so hard that I thought it was a pike. And so instantly my brain was like, and even how it reacted on the live scope, I thought it was a pike. Just the way it shot forward and cracked that bait, I thought, well, it's a pike, you know. And lo and behold, I'm reeling it up, and I'm like, that's a walleye. And instantly, light bulb moment, dialed in, where you're like, okay, these are all walleyes, and they're suspended out here. So that first day, we spent targeting these suspended fish that were anywhere from, 15 feet. We're in 15 feet deep, but anywhere from 3 feet down to 7 feet down, or even 8 feet down. And we would target fish suspended as they were moving in the water. And they were cruising through that point because there was current and moving. And as we got towards evening, all we did was push in closer to the point and then spot lock. And those fish were flying through at a rapid rate. It was like, it reminded me like Star Wars. There was so many fish coming through. You think of the scene in Star Wars where they're flying through the stars, right? On your live scope, it looked like that. There was so many fish coming through. We were cracking them, doubles, quadruples, bang, 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 bang. But then, and so we come off the high of day one, right? We're like, okay, we got them patterned. We got them figured out. They're high in the water column, most of them. We did catch some on the bottom, but it was like the high ones, you floated past them. The ones on the bottom, you just cracked the jig past them and you were catching them. I caught them on the hair jig. Robbie's using the jerk. We were using freeloaders at that point. I think even mooch minnows. But it was like we had this pattern down. We caught so many fish that first day. I mean, I was just like, I was so dialed in. I was just casting right in front of them. I could time them. With those fish, you have to time them with the current, like you do in a lot of other lakes where, the fish are swimming. You got to get it out in front of them. But on Lake Winnipeg, they were really moving with that current. Even though the current wasn't ripping on day one where we were fishing, it was moving enough where, you had to get it out in front of them. But we thought, okay, we've got it dialed in. We know what to do. Fast forward to day two, I can't sleep, right? It's 4:30 in the morning. I'm already up making coffee. It's already light. We're up there a ways, on Lake Winnipeg. You're up there in the latitude where, this time of year, we didn't have a lot of darkness. I mean, it only gets dark for about 4 hours. So I'm up early making coffee. Can't wait to get out there. Went back out to that same point, and they're not there, right? They're not even behind the water column. I don't see them on the bottom. You get a lot of migrating fish this time of year. And so ultimately, we kind of did the lake tour. We ran around. We did come back out to that same spot, but we slid out further. And there they were. They were suspended. We started catching them, started doing the suspended thing again. But it was a little bit tough because, I'm in the front on the trolling motor. When you're chasing down suspended fish like that, the person in the front has a huge advantage, even over the person on the pole. If you can spot lock on a spot, the person on the pole, can join in on the action. But if you're moving and you're chasing down a fish, someone on the pole in the back, unless you're seeing multiple fish, sort of within that 50, 60, 70 feet, you're kind of left behind, right? And so I was just banging them in the front, but we weren't like getting everybody involved. And, so we hit a few more spots. We did good. I wouldn't say we pounded them like day one, but we still caught a lot of fish. I mean, wouldn't you say, Robbie, that we were in that 50, 60, 75 walleye range day two?
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't as good as the first day, but we were still catching a few fish here and there. But it was just a lot of like individuals where you drive and then you'll see one, you throw on them, catch that one, and then you drive for another minute or two, and then you see another one. It wasn't like where it was just all scattered everywhere. Where you pan around, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, just all in the whole area. It's just like one, or maybe there's 2 right there. Kind of like that.
Well, I would say day two there was definitely our slowest day, but it was about to take a giant turn in the right direction because we, towards the afternoon, we did better. Remember, we got in that spot, we pulled up, and it was pretty good. we went in and actually unloaded our stuff at our place, cooked lunch. But when we got in, we talked to one of the guides, one of Donovan's guides, Patty. We talked to Brad, talked to a couple of other guys around the water, and they had banged them, right? I mean, banged them. And when I mean bang them, they're getting 150, 200 fish easy, So they're like, hey, you got to get up shallow. And we did the night before. We had been up shallow. So we went in, we cooked burgers, we unloaded our stuff, and then we went back out fishing. And we went shallow, and it was game on. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many walleyes I saw from 2 feet of water to 6 feet of water, right? We spot locked in about 6.5, 7. And that evening, there were so many fish up shallow where it was absolute pandemonium, right? And then right then, again, dialed in, light bulb moment where we're like, okay, we found them shallow along this sort of rocky break line. Well, we started looking on the map. We're like, well, there's rocky shorelines. We can run stretches of hundreds and hundreds and miles of shoreline that no one's on, right? And so we looked at a map and we're like, you know what? We're going to hit these rocky shorelines the next day. So same thing. We got in probably, I don't know, we fished. I think we didn't get in until about 9:30 at night. We got in, quick went to bed, got up early, same thing, out there by 6 a.m. We started hitting shorelines and instantly started having success. We pulled up on this point and we were catching them, but it wasn't like doubles and quadruples catching them, but it was like fish, fish, fish. I mean, very consistently. We wrapped around the point and it was like the bottom dropped out. We found the layer of where these fish are, right? From 2 to 6 feet of water, I have never seen so many walleyes on a live scope at one time in my life. The fact that Robbie was in the pole in the back, I was on the trolling motor in the front, and we're absolutely crushing them. Now, when we slid up shallower, I went from using a 1/2 ounce or even 3/4 ounce jig like we were using out in the current to using 3/8 or less. I think, Rob, you were using a 1/4. I started using a 1/4 ounce sleek jig. With a bigger freeloader, a bigger profile. I was on the jerk, but I was like, I'm going to throw that freeloader. That has the buoyancy of, all the Crush City baits as well, maybe even more than the jerk. And man, we absolutely crushed them. When you burn through like 5 packs of Crush City plastics, you're on them because you catch so many fish on one plastic. And so the fact that we were burning through them at the rate that we were, I was like, no way. And it was literally every cast. It was doubles, quadruples, triples, quadruple. It was just like one after another. And we were so dialed in that third day. After the second day where we, got a little tip from one of the guides. And I really appreciate the tip we got from him because he's like literally keyed us in on. And all he said to me was, he was like, think shallow. That's all he said. That think shallow. Those 2 words, boom, went off in my head because the first day, as we slid in towards the point, towards evening, we crushed them. And then day 2, when we slid in shallow, crushed them. There was fish moving in the current. They were nonstop. We spot locked. The second day, we spot locked for I don't know how long and caught them in the evening. The third day, we moved down that shoreline. We worked about a 1 mile stretch of shoreline all day long, and we could have just stayed right there. But other boats had started moving in, and, it's our first time up there. We want to explore as well. So, we slid down that shoreline. There was never a time where we weren't catching them. We were catching them in 4 feet of water. We were catching them in 8 feet of water. We were catching some fish suspended, some on the bottom, tailoring our jigging cadences just to those fish. If they were up high in the water column, we'd swim it past them. If they were down on the bottom, we'd snap jig past them. Sometimes it was a version of both where you'd float it past a fish. They wouldn't strike. You'd let it hit the bottom and boom, they would just absolutely smash it.
Yeah, my favorite part about that spot was when we'd go really shallow. We would be in 4 feet of water and you scan up there and you'd see 15, 20 walleyes and you throw it on them and they'll just eat it on the fall or they'll just eat it on the first pop. And they're all like 23 to 24 inches and 4 feet and they're always moving. And half the time you watch them swim under you. So you just drop your jig down the side of the boat, pop a 24 incher right under your feet. it was just insane.
I couldn't believe how many we caught right underneath the boat or the trolling motor in 4 to 6 feet of water. It was crazy. And I know the water's dirty there, but it was astounding how many we actually caught right underneath the boat. I mean, it was shocking that the fact that, you would see them coming sometimes in the current and you're like, all right. And I would just pitch out right in front of the trolling motor. I'd set the hook so many times close to my propeller that I'm like, whoa, I'm going to catch this fish or catch my line in the propeller of my prop on my trolling motor. And I know there was so many countless times where I'd look back and Robbie's like, I got one. And he's like literally fighting it around the pole in the back. So unbelievable experience. I tell you what, if you've never done Lake Winnipeg in the summer, it should be on your radar. It should be a bucket list for you. It is an absolute beat down on big fish. If you're heading up there, if you're listening to the podcast and you're like, you know what, we're going in the next few weeks, bring some Crush City plastics. We're going to take a quick break. When I get back, we're going to talk more about Lake Winnipeg. We're going to talk about strategies when it comes to fishing plastics, coupling the right size jig with the right size plastic, using hair jigs and plastics, all of those combinations after this. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you are after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water. Okay, we are back chatting Lake Winnipeg with my son, Robbie Roach. His graduation present was heading up there to the big lake, the Big Windy, to do some summer fishing, something that both him and I have never done before. Absolutely love it. But let's get into some of the jig profiles we used, the jigs that we coupled with our plastics. Now, after being there for 4 days and fishing for 4 days, there's jigs that I wish I would have brought in. There's more colors that I wish I would have brought up there. There's definitely going to be a kit of just specifically Lake Winnipeg open water stuff that I want to bring up there and try. Because when you get on a bite like that is so special, you want to be able to experiment with different things. There's one jig that I wish I would have brought. Well, two jigs, actually. One, the new VMC snitch jig. I thought I had thrown them in there. I didn't have that blade. But in that stained water, I love using blades, whether you use the snitch jig, whether you use like an underspin, something like that with a little bit of flash. I know going into it, I watched some YouTube videos. Some people were using an underspin. Anything that's going to give off a flash like that, especially with as much bait as we saw in the water column, I definitely would go back there with some snitch jigs and stuff. I was so bummed I didn't have the new snitch jig because I love that. Any sort of propeller bait. Historically, Lake Winnipeg, I remember going up there ice fishing in the early 2000s. All everyone used was a salty on a Whistler jig. And a Whistler jig is a propeller jig like a snitch jig. And that's all the people ever used back then. It was way before rip and wraps, all of that stuff, right? And, fast forward to now, there's a lot of people that's what they still use, a propeller type of jig with a salty. We saw an incredible amount of boats just spot locked in the current. They didn't move all day. They didn't move all weekend. The same boats we'd pass going from spot to spot where they're literally just sitting in the current. And, you think of Lake Winnipeg, it's big, right? And it's got water moving through. A lot of the current that you see is, yes, it's from the river, but it's also from the lake. Like if you get a lot of wind, you get a lot of current, and it can change from north to south. When we were there, we didn't have a ton of current just because we didn't have a ton of wind. But I know just talking to my buddies, and they're like, hey, be prepared that you'll be spot locked and you're catching them going this way, one direction, and all of a sudden, the wind will die off or whatever the next day, and the current's completely different. And so anything with a propeller on it, anything you can get in that current, I can see why underspins or like a snitch jig would work fantastic. And so next time I'm heading up there, those will definitely be in the boat. The other thing is plastics I use, right? We brought freeloaders, and I would say we brought 3 and 4 inch freeloaders. We had jerks, which are 3 and 3/4 inch. We had some Mayer paddle tails. We had some 3 and 4 inch paddle tails. I would definitely upsize some of my plastics based on the fish size that we caught. I would not be afraid to go with like a 5 or even a 6 inch plastic at times with a bigger underspin, something that's going to be more buoyant. Because when we were pitching at fish that were suspended in the water, they wanted that buoyancy. And a few times they didn't want it just swimming back to them. They wanted you kind of snapping it a little bit, but you didn't want it to fall too quickly. And so when we kind of categorized our jigs, once I started seeing that fall rate was a big thing, and I've known that since I've ice fished up there. A lot of those rip and wraps that you use, flutter baits, everything like that has always been sort of the go-tos for Lake Winnipeg. It's because of the float, right? They hit it on the fall. They were doing the exact same thing in the summer. And so what I was doing was going away from those heavier jigs, because I heard so many people that are like, oh, you got to bring a 1 ounce, 3/4 ounce jig. And that had to do a lot with the current ripping. But since the current wasn't ripping, we went to a 1/2 ounce, 3/8, even a 1/4, and started catching way more fish. And so with the freeloader, coupling that with like a sleek jig, like a 1/4 ounce sleek jig, having a little bit longer shank on that VMC sleek jig helped tremendously. Robbie was using the jerk so he could get away with just using a neon moon eye jig, and he was using a 1/4 ounce. I also did some hair jigs. I love fishing hair jigs. The water is cold up there. Even though we blasted into summer in the States, even up there, the temperatures were really nice when we were up there. The surface temps were still in the 40s. And so the hair jig worked extremely well. And I was using a 1/2 ounce, just bucktail jig. The neon moon eye jigs work great. The moontail jigs work great. But again, I would go back to using some sort of underspin, some sort of, snitch jig, that sort of thing. Those will definitely be with me next time. But coupling the right plastics with the right jig head design was key. Using that sleek jig with the freeloaders, using the neon moon eye jigs with the jerks. Even you could have gotten away with the Mayer paddle tail. We got some on the Mayers, but coupling those with the neon moon eye head. We also use some hybrids, swim head jigs with the corkscrew where it'll hold the plastic on there. We did that with some of the Mayers, worked extremely well. Those fish are so aggressive that TPE material is a must. Also with the Crush Cities or any plastic, we didn't bring super glue, and I would definitely bring super glue, not because it's tearing our baits. It's to keep the baits on the jig heads. They were hitting it so aggressively sometimes. You would feel them crack it just like pow, and they would sort of miss it, and we'd watch them miss it on our live scopes and our forward-facing sonars. And we'd watch them miss it, and they'd, especially if I wasn't using a jerk, if I was just using the freeloader, they would pull that down off that sleek jig. So next time I would definitely bring some super glue, put a dab of super glue on the bottom head of that jig and push that plastic up, hold it in place. You get a lot more strikes, because once they pull that plastic down, you don't get as many strikes. Even with rigging your plastics, you have to make sure that it's rigged properly. Otherwise, you don't get bites. And if they pull it down at all, you don't get bites. That's any plastic. And that's just good word of advice for any plastics that are fishing. Robbie, what was your take? You saw even where they nipped your tail off sometimes. You know how hard it is to cut a tail off of a Crush City plastic, but they managed to rip it off or tear it off. You just weren't getting the bites that you were getting when you got the action with that tail.
Yeah, with that freeloader, it has that extended tail with a little bit more material on the very end, so it kind of flicks when you're swimming it. Well, they would hit it so hard that they ripped the tail off. Those plastics, you can really stretch them out, and they're just fine. And they would hit I could watch them on the live scope. If I just miss them off to the side, they'll turn their head and hit that bait so hard where it rips the plastic like off the jig. So when you reel it up, then you have to fix it. But once I switched to the jerk is that really stretchy material. So it stayed on my jig the whole time. And I was just using that straight white jerk, and they were absolutely cracking it for most of the day. I used it for 2 days straight, and I bet I caught 100 walleyes on one jerk plastic.
Yeah.
Didn't even rip.
That TP material is far superior to any other thing out there. I mean, it's a guide's dream to be able to use one plastic like that. The other thing I liked when we were up there is we didn't have to deal with salties. I don't mind salties. Don't get me wrong. The bait shops, and I'll put them on if I have to. We use them in the winter a lot. Sometimes they get fussy, so you're putting a salty on there. What I like the fact that we don't have to deal with the salties in the boat. The pain in the butt of salties is they're frozen. You put them in your cooler, they thaw out, they get nasty, they stink, they don't stay on the hook. Just to go up there with a bunch of Crush City plastics, and I burned through way more than I thought we were going to, just because we caught that many fish. I mean, we caught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of walleyes. We did share a few, with our friends that were up there. They were wondering what we were getting them on, so we were sharing some freeloaders. We were sharing some jerks. My go-to color, though, was that electric shad and that smelt. Yes, I caught them on white. There was certainly times where white was superior, but even you switched over at times when we got into those areas where they really wanted that smelt color. It seemed like in that current, they really wanted that smelt. And, for whatever reason, a couple times when they were feeding up really high in the water column, it seemed like they wanted that darker color, and they were pushing the bait to the surface. How many times, Robbie, where you hook a walleye and you're bringing it in and bait is just darting out of the way? It's jumping out of the water, getting out of the way of that walleye. So they're feeding up. And it seemed like then they wanted that darker profile. And I personally think it's just because it's, it sort of blends in, sort of like those bait fish we saw.
Yeah, that day 3 bite. I caught 20 fish and 20 casts in that spot. And every fish I would bring up, the bait would just be boiling up, just little shiners and whatever. And on the live scope, you can just see them everywhere, like up on the surface, all these minnows, and they'd swim by the boat. It was just insane. And half the time there'd be a walleye just right behind it, and you throw on it and it absolutely cracked that bait.
If you want to get good at casting and, getting baits in front of fish, if you want to get good at using certain plastics, if you want to get good at jigging on the bottom and just cracking plastics, if you want to get good at jigs and plastics in general, highly recommend going to Lake Winnipeg. It really opened my eyes to, what quality fishing can be. And I've been all over Canada. I've been all over the US. There's very few times where I can say that I've seen fish. Well, first of all, that's the most fish I've ever seen on live scope in shallow, or the most fish I've seen on live sonar, period, in any stretch. And I've been on lakes like Winnie and Leech and wherever where it's like endless amounts of walleyes in the fall, in the spring. I've been on Mille Lacs where it's just like they don't end. Times 10, right? Where you get on a shoreline and they don't end. And they're absolutely everywhere. You're catching them on this side of the boat. The other guys, we had Jack Dietz in our boat a lot. We were up there with our buddy Phil and Jack as well. Jack's crushing them. A lot of times he's not even looking at the live scope. We had, Dwight, we had some other guys in our boat that weren't paying attention to the live scope, or they would loosely pay attention, but they were just casting and catching them. You could catch them at any direction. And that was definitely sheer numbers of fish, but then just the overall size of the fish and the quality, like Robbie said, how many fish we caught over 24 inches is mind boggling. And it because you ice fished up there before. I've ice fished up there before. And if anybody listening has ever ice fished, they know it's just absolutely filled with big fish. You should go see it in the summer. It's absolutely amazing. I've always been intimidated by that lake in the summer because there's a couple things that happen. One, and they're just putting them out now, but there's nets everywhere, right? There's a lot of netters up there. They're netting all over the place. I was always worried about getting their way, but then more so than that, it was the wind. You always hear about the wind. You go up to Lake Winnipeg and you might not be able to fish because of the wind. sort of non-factor where we were fishing. It was like we were able to hide out of the wind, and granted, knock on wood, we hit a stretch of weather that was excellent, just absolutely phenomenal, where we didn't have to worry about weather. We didn't have to worry about wind. We just had to worry about where the walleyes were at and absolutely crush them. So, Rob, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about strategy at Lake Winnipeg. We've got a bunch of great fishing reports coming up for you on the podcast. All of our contributors that contribute each and every week with great fishing reports are coming in with some red hot June reports, because not only was the fishing hot on Lake Winnipeg, the fishing is heating up everywhere. I've been back on Mille Lacs since I've been back. I know, talking to Rem on Leech Lake, things are on fire. The Leech Lake tournament was going on. Just all sorts of great bites across the state. So stay tuned. We got more Dialed In Angling after this.
Arneson's Rocky Point Resort in northern Minnesota offers a little something for everyone. Nestled on Lake of the Woods South Shore, it provides easy access to 14 remarkable reefs. Serious anglers know that Arneson's offers some of the best fishing, charter fishing, and small boat fishing options, all supported by the largest protected marina on the lake's South Shore. Accommodation selections range from 1 to 5 bedrooms. Equipped with all the modern conveniences, guests can enjoy a delightful dining experience and stunning lake views at the Rock Harbor Lodge, an on-site full-service bar and restaurant. The two beaches provide hours of fun for the whole family. Whether you're seeking an idyllic fishing spot or a relaxing vacation, Arneson's Rocky Point has everything you need. Check them out at arnesonsresort.com.
All right, so I'm going to get back into some Lake Winnipeg discussion here and just talk about the overall experience. You've heard it from me and Robbie. If you've never experienced Lake Winnipeg, I highly recommend you get up there and see it for yourself. If you've ever been intrigued, if you've ever fished up there in the winter and thought, man, why don't I come up here in the summer? Do it. Highly recommend getting a guide. You can call, there's lots of guides up there. Donovan Parisi, any of his guides are top notch. They were out there when we were out there. We were talking to him afterwards. There's all sorts of guides. We had an opportunity to fish with my good buddy, Roger Stearns. I know Lee Nolan came out. He fished with Phil. Just a lot of great people in Manitoba and a lot of great guides on Lake Winnipeg that guide year round that can put you in the right direction. So Donovan Pierce is up there. You know, his guides are top notch. I try to stay in contact with Donovan throughout the season just to see how things are going. You know, we've had him on the podcast. I fish with Roger Stearns. Roger doesn't guide, but he's a great resource up there as far as recommending people and doing it. I had a great time in the boat with Roger. I was pumped to get back in the boat with him. He's a good friend. He was in the front boat of me. We were running down fish with the forward-facing sonar unit, pitching at fish in all directions, just having fun, laughing about it. You know, you catch so many fish that it's just like your mouth hurts from smiling all day. So I highly recommend getting up to Lake Winnipeg and just going after those greenbacks in the summer. You can do it all summer long. It's really good in the spring. It's really good in the fall, but all summer long, the fishing's really good up there. If you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what you're doing, I highly recommend tracking down a guide. And that could be said for anywhere you go. It's just like it pays huge dividends if you can go out with a guide for a day or two and then, you know, do it on your own afterwards. It's going to cut down that learning curve. You don't have to worry about, you know, obstacles or if you're going to hit anything. You also know exactly where to go, how they're fishing, jig types, all of that stuff. The other thing is if you don't want to haul a boat up there, you can jump in the boat with those guys and just crack fish all day long. That is an option as well. Either way, I highly recommend going up there and just experiencing it. It's super awesome. Super great trip. I will be doing it more often. The fact that, you know, the way the fish were hitting the baits and the way I was able to fish the entire time is how I love to fish. I love fishing jigs and plastics. I always talk about how June is so electric and it's because there's no wrong way to fish. Well, this is a prime example of that. You can go up to Lake Winnipeg. You can absolutely crack them on jigs and plastics. I used all sorts of different crush cities, different heads. and had an absolute blast doing it. And literally my hands are hurting afterwards. And highly recommend that. So we're going to get away from some of the Lake Winnipeg talk. Let's get into some fishing. I've been on Mille Lacs since I came back, and I want to tell you, June is definitely here. Just not just my reports on Mille Lacs, but you're going to hear from our other contributors, whether it's in Brainerd, whether it's out in Ottertail, up on Leech. Everybody's chiming in saying June is here and the bite is on. But it's interesting because in different lakes, the bite's different. Like on Leech, for example, they're not really cracking them on the bobbers yet. It seems like it's more of a jig bite still. Jig and minnow bite was just like off the chain this week. I know a lot of people that fish the Leech Lake tournament. A lot of those guys did really well with minnow bites. On Mille Lacs, for example, where I'm at, didn't throw any jigs and plastics. Today I was out with customers. We primarily threw bobbers, but man, did we light them up. Finally, it seems like the bobber bite is on. We caught a ton on leeches. We caught a ton on night crawlers, throwing bobbers out there on different pods of fish. Monster bug hatches going on Mille Lacs Lake that is just like driving these fish to be a little bit suspended, a little bit off the edge of the structure, but they're biting. And we mainly targeted 12 to, I would say, 20 feet today, but most of the fish were anywhere from 8 to 10 feet down. Almost every fish we caught today, almost every fish suspended in the water column. And so what I like doing is taking the bobbers. I talked about it on last week's podcast. I got the bobber. I've got the sniper swivel on there, that VMC sniper swivel, about a 3-foot leader, and then a 16th ounce jig with a leech, and then just popping it on these fish. And what I'm doing is we pull up to a spot. I want to see the fish, see where they're at. Okay, let's say we're in 14 feet of water. The fish are 10 feet down. I'm setting my bobber stop with my forward-facing sonar, so I know my bait is going to be presented just above those fish. And then we're driving around. As soon as we see them, we're throwing it on those fish and watching those corks go down. I can't think of too many better ways to spend a day on Mille Lacs than throwing corks in that manner and targeting suspended fish. I think back to when we used to do a lot of power fishing or power corking, where we drive around with 2D sonar. As soon as we marked them on our graph, we'd throw the bobbers behind the boat, put it neutral, and catch those fish. We're basically doing the same thing today, only we're using forward-facing sonar. We're not running over the top of them. We're throwing the bobbers on them and catching them. A couple weeks ago, I tried throwing bobbers on fish. They didn't want it. The bite was off. They didn't want the bobbers. They didn't want the leeches. They wanted more leeches on the bottom. They wanted minnows on the bottom. The bobber bite is on. Anytime you get into these bug hatch time frames, this is the time to fish corks. This is where it really, really shines. I think this is where, slip bobbers sort of, etched their way into history in Mille Lacs Lake. It had to be back in the day when bug hatches hit, because right now I'm on just on the outside of rock piles, just on the outside of gravel bars. I could be on shoreline breaks, and I'm literally just driving around until I'm seeing those groups of fish to throw on. And it helps when you get a little bit of wind. Today we had some wind, so they're biting better. If you get those flat, calm scenarios, the fish are a lot more spooky. They're not feeding. I know I've talked to a ton of anglers this year, and it seems like there is a big varying difference between certain anglers that are catching them and others that aren't. And it doesn't have to do solely with forward-facing sonar. It has to do with how they're fishing. Like earlier this year, I had, you heard it when we talked to the anglers that fished out there for the Derby. We talked to the people that fished in the classic bass walleye tournament out there. You could talk to those anglers, and those were very good anglers, and say certain spots in the lake, they wanted a leech, right? They wanted a leech on the bottom. Other spots in the lake, they wanted a jig and minnow. And so I'm sort of doing the same thing with the bobbers. I'm going out there and I'm finding fish, throwing the bobbers out there with leeches. If they won't hit those, we're putting crawlers on. Today, it seemed like they wanted leeches. But then the last spot we fished, it was almost all crawlers. So that's my tip for you, is like, if you want to go out and target fish with slip bobbers, Mille Lacs is on fire right now. This bite should continue for at least a week or two. you're going to see a lot of these fish, as soon as the bugs are gone, they're gone, right? These fish will start to slide out maybe a little bit deeper, slide off these secondary breaks out into no man's land or even out into some other gravel until another bug hatch occurs. And then boom, they're right back in there. But you're seeing really good numbers of fish all over the place. And I was amazed at how many fish we saw, and not all of them bite. Spoiler alert, you could throw on a bunch of fish that don't bite, and that's just part of it. But then you go to the next pack and then all of a sudden they're biting. You're getting a double, or you're getting a cork to go down. That's what to expect on Mille Lacs Lake. Highly recommend, if you're going there this weekend, tie on a bobber, slip bobber, have the knot, sniper swivel. I like to use a 16th or an 1/8 ounce sniper swivel, a 3-foot leader, and then just a plain jig head, or a 16th ounce jig head, or a plain hook. And then using either a leech or a night crawler, you're going to put a ton of walleyes in the boat. It's really fun. June is here. June is electric. And so with that, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to cut to the fishing reports. We got a lot of great insights from our contributors. Hopefully they can help you get dialed in on wherever you're headed. Stay tuned.
What's going on, guys? Brandon Olson here with Lockjaw Guide Service with an Ottertail County fishing report. Water temps are creeping up towards 70 mark, which means fishing is on fire. Multiple different patterns are working, and multiple different presentations are working on the walleye front. We're getting fish on jerkbaits, Lindy rigs, slip bobbers, jigs and minnows, jigs and crawlers, jigs and leeches, casting crankbaits. We're getting them pulling spinners. We're getting a few on bottom bouncers. So depending on the day and the weather and the conditions, a lot of different things are working. The main area of fish that we're kind of finding, or the majority of fish that we're finding, eater size, is still kind of on that first edge of the break, either just up on the flat or just down off the edge. Some really flat, calm days, we're getting them in 20, 25 feet of water. Other days, you get a little wind, you can get them right up on top with jerk baits and jigs and plastics and jigs and minnows and things like that. So walleye fishing's been pretty good. You just got to get it around them and just keep working those areas. Those fish are kind of spread out. There's lots of bait. On the crappie front, we're seeing those fish as post-spawn. We're catching the majority of our fish now from 6 to 12 feet of water, kind of working that inside and the outside edge of the weeds. And if that's a little bit slower, we'll get right up in those weeds if we need to as well. So I'm a big proponent in big baits for crappies. I like to throw 2 to 3 inch plastics on a 16th or an 1/8 ounce jig and work those through those weed beds. And you'll be surprised how many nice walleyes you pick up as well. So fishing's on fire up here. If you guys want to come fishing up in this area, be happy to take you out. Best way to get a hold of me is 218-640-0158. Otherwise, you can find us at lockjawguideservice.com.
Hey, this is Alex Rezock with Perch Patrol Guide Service in Devils Lake, North Dakota. The walleyes here are really starting to pick up in that anywhere from 6 to 10 foot of water range. Focus on your weeds. They've been really hanging out in those over the rocks. Water temperatures hovering right around that 65 degrees in the main parts of the lake. Get into the back bays, it'll probably be getting up to 70 here with this calmer weather we've had. If you're looking for pike, pretty much you can cast any shoreline you want. Just any sort of jig and a plastic or crankbait will do. White bass are pretty much everywhere again this year. Get into any back shallow water bay and you should be able to find some white bass in there as well.
Trig Roach with TR Guide Service here in the Brandon Lakes area. The walleye fishing is on fire right now. We're seeing water temps in that mid to high 60s range. Fish are up in that 12 to 17 foot of water. We're done with the minnows. We picked up the slip bobber and leeches. Some jig and crawler, jig and plastics are all producing some really quality fish. We're looking at the edge of new growth weeds into sand. Gravel still producing bites. And we're getting fish that are feeding up on big bait pods off the deeper edges of some breaks. So we're pitching slip bobber and leeches at that and getting a lot of fish to bite. Crappies, they're kind of starting to move out of the bays a little bit. Still getting some in there. Some are out in that 10, 12, 13 foot range, just outside of the spawning grounds. We're just using slip bobbers, throwing jigs, plastics. All that's been working to get those to bite. This is Trig Roach. We'll see you in the next one.
All right, that's a wrap on this show. Once again, thanks again to all the contributors each and every week that are giving us some fishing reports. These guys are on the water every single day. And by the sounds of it, June is here and it's going to be here for a little while. I am so pumped. June is one of those months I wish that lasted 2 or 3 more months because it is so fun. You can get so good at all sorts of different techniques for different species. You can go on a lake like Mille Lacs and target walleyes, smallmouth, pike, muskies, the muskie openers this weekend. You can go on small fisheries and do quite well with walleyes. You can switch to largemouth, panfish, all of the above. And so June is just one of those electric time periods for all the lakes that you enjoy fishing. I highly encourage that you get some destination trips in there. Head up to Canada like we did. Try some new bodies of water. Get outside your comfort zone by fishing different techniques and getting good with your electronics, your forward-facing sonar units, your mapping units, and just getting good with boat control. If you're having success, that's going to bode for your confidence, and you're just going to become a better angler as a result of it. So thanks for tuning in to this week's podcast. Good luck on the water. As always, I'm Tony Roach. This has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast.